She's ready.
I'd like to reconvene the Board of County Commissioners meeting. It's approximately 5 minutes after 2.
George is mad at me.
We push the time back to 2. This portion of his public hearing agenda, I'd like to ask the board for acceptance of approved publication.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. The rules for public hearing. Our staff will present each item for consideration, staff's recommendation. The board will have the opportunity to ask questions of staff when the presentation is finished. The applicant will have the opportunity to make their presentation next. The board will have a chance to ask questions once the presenter is finished. Members of the public interested in speaking for or against the issue or the project, please fill out the yellow speaker form located in the lobby, indicating whether the number and whether you're for or against it, and place the form in the tray in the lobby, or please give it to Shaney Beach right here in front. Members of the public will be allowed to be giving comments once the item is once per item. If you'd like to have your comments submitted for the record, please fill out the green form that's also located in the lobby. Speakers should state their name and address clearly for the record, whether they're for or against the item. Speakers will be given 3 minutes to speak unless they are the official spokesperson of an HOA or legal organization or of a group, then they'll be given 6 minutes. If a board asks questions regarding the speaker's comments, an opportunity to be given once the speaker's time has expired. Speakers should limit their comments pertinent to the information regarding to the agenda item under discussion. The clerk is required to obtain all documents, photographs, etc., that is presented to the board so we can have an accurate and clear public record. So if you do show us your information, please be prepared to leave it with the clerk. Once all the speakers are heard, the applicant will be given the opportunity to rebut if necessary. We'll close the public hearing portion and have the matters in the hands of the commission for discussion, recommendation, or motion. Following a motion and a second, the board will discuss the issue and a vote will be taken. Commissioners who do not cast an objecting vote are considered to be voting in support of the motion. While the board welcomes all comments from any people or persons interested in the proceedings, Florida law requires that the board's decision in quasi-judicial action be supported by competent, sustainable evidence presented to the board during the hearing of the application. Competent, sustainable evidence is such evidence as reasonable mind would accept is adequate in support of the conclusion. Therefore, it needs to be factually based in the record to support the opinion and testimony of both experts and non-expert witnesses. Persons presenting testimony may rely on factual information as they present it. Any persons who present written or any other information is presented to us, all copies must be left for the clerk so we can have an accurate public record. Are there any commissioners receiving oral or written comments or communications regarding quasi-judicial items? If so, please disclose and submit it to the clerk. I do not have any. Okay.
I turned mine in.
I have none.
Great. We'll now move on to item number 30, and we'll have staff present. This is a District 3 item.
Good afternoon. This is a request of Mary Robinson with Planning and Development Division. Item 30 on your agenda is a request for approval of a 1,531.5 square foot boat dock on property located on the north side of Lake Brantley Terrace, approximately 1,900 feet north of State Road 434, more particularly known as 100 Lake Brantley Terrace. The property owners, Scott and Melissa Memory, are proposing to retain the existing 1,077 square foot dock and boathouse and construct an additional 454.5 square foot dock, which will result in a 1,531.5 square foot dock. The existing dock was expanded in 1998 for a maximum square footage of 926 square feet. During the review of this permit, it was discovered that it did exceed by 151 square feet, tripping it over 1,000 square feet. So the approval today of this application will legitimize the existing square footage built in excess in 1998. Chapter 70 of the dredge and filling of the Land Development Code contains 7 items to be considered when a boat dock is issued. A boat dock permit is issued. The application does comply with all 7 of these items and meets the height regulation required by our code. The applicant has also been issued a general use permit by Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And finally, staff is recommending that the Board of County Commissioners approve the request for a 1,531.5 square foot dock on Lake Brantley property located on the north side of Lake Brantley Terrace. And the applicant's consultant is here if you have any questions, and can answer any questions.
Any questions for staff?
Not
Seeing
yet.
none, we'll have the applicant, or the representative of the applicant.
Nothing to add.
Okay,
Excellent.
the person, they're saying they have nothing to add. Any written request? Anyone in the audience that'd like to address this item? Before I close public comments, anyone else? Public comments is now closed. This is a District 3.
Now I have a question.
Go right ahead.
I was waiting for staff. I was waiting for the citizens. Okay, so this is, the way it happened is in 1998, they were supposed to build a 926-foot dock.
Correct.
But they actually built a 1,077-foot dock. So it was out of compliance. Now they want to add another 500. Now, it sounds, that's another 500 square feet. That sounds to me another, living quarters. I know we're allowing alternative living quarters in the backyard, but could somebody explain the extra 500 feet, please?
I'll defer to the applicant's
you.
consultant.
This is as much for information as anything else.
Sure. Sheila, Sickcrest Streamline Permitting, 10024 Fort Mason Drive. The layout of the dock is not ergonomic. The existing structure had a boat slip on one side, a little bit of deck on one side, another little bit of deck on the other side. It had a rather oversized walkway. It had an angled area on the backside of the boathouse. Wasted square footage just everywhere. So all they're really adding is a little place where they can have an upper deck and a little slip underneath that area. So they're adding, what seems like a substantial amount of square feet, but it's really just going to end up being a 2-slip boathouse with a small upper deck. And it's not abnormally large for the lake. There are quite a few large docks in that area. This guy has a lot of shoreline, so it's not going to stick out. It's not longer than a lot of docks, but that's really why it ended up being so big, because there's a lot of wasted space. If they had to trim it back, you're talking about completely redesigning the thing, because the walkway is oversized, wide, and
So it's not like a little boathouse.
it's a regular slip. The existing boat slip is not abnormally large at all. It's a standard boat slip for just a regular ski boat, and then they also want to house another smaller boat. So it'd be a 2-slip boathouse, but not a lot of deck around it.
I don't have any more questions.
Richard Zimbauer.
And we're not proposing to go any further out into the lake?
Yes, it is. They're extending part of they're actually taking a covered area that's there now and cutting a slip in it. So most of the slip will be space that's already there. And then the end of the new boathouse sticks out. I think it's like 6 or 8 feet. It's not very much at all. I should have had the drawing in front of me, shouldn't I have?
Yes, you should have.
Page 12.
Any other discussion?
No.
What is the recommendation of the District Commissioner?
And that's why I say, thank you very much. Well, I have 2 recommendations. First of all, I'm not, I did talk to a citizen there that's very, familiar with it, and he and other citizens didn't seem to have any concern about it. So this particular thing I have no concern about. But before I make a motion, I just wonder, this is another thing, I know we've done this in the past. In fact, we've done it quite often, but I just don't understand why boat docks come before us if they're over 1,000 square feet to get approved. It just seemed to be, that we could come up with something that would allow that to happen without it coming before the commission. And with that, with that editorial comment, I will move approval of the 1,531.5 square foot dock on property located north of Lake Brantley Terrace, approximately 1,902 feet north of State Road 434, more particularly known as 100 Lake Brantley Terrace.
Second.
Motion is second. Discussion. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 31. Yours is bigger than mine.
Yeah.
Okay, Mary Robinson with Planning and Development Division. Item 31 on your agenda is another request for an approval of a 1,268 square foot boat dock house located on the south side of Howell Harbor Drive, approximately 600 feet south of Red Bug Lake Road, more particularly known as 1049 Howell Harbor Drive. The applicant is proposing to construct a new 10-foot tall, 1,268 square foot boat dock, and the application does comply with the 7 items in the Chapter 70 of the dredge and fill ordinance out of the Land Development Code, and they have been issued a permit from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for the expansion. Staff is recommending the Board of County Commissioners approve the request for a 1,268 square foot boat dock house located on the south side of Howell Harbor Drive, approximately 600 feet south of Red Bug Lake Road, more particularly known as 1040 Howell Harbor Drive. And the applicant's consultant is also present to answer any questions.
Any questions? We have the consultant now.
Nothing to add unless you have...
Consultant has noted that they have no other additional comments. Any written requests? Anyone in the public would like to address this, either for or against? For or against. We're going to close public comments. This is a District 1 item. I'd like to make a motion to approve the request for a 1,268 square foot boat dock / house on the property located on the south side of Howell Harbor Drive, approximately 601 feet south of Red Bug Lake Road, more particularly known as 1049 Howell Harbor Drive.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, like sign. Motion passes. We'll now move on to item number 32.
Liz Parkhurst, Building Division. Item number 32 relates to the unoccupied structure located at 2352 Sunnyview Drive in Oviedo. On March 22nd, 2022, this board issued a notice of determination of public nuisance, setting a public hearing date to discuss the unoccupied structure and in-ground spa. Recently, staff discovered that on March 29th, 2022, a less pendants was recorded and the foreclosure process began by the mortgage holder. A foreclosure hearing is scheduled for June 28th, 2022 in Circuit Court. Staff is recommending the board continue this hearing until a future date to allow for the foreclosure process to proceed and give staff time to re-notice the hearing if necessary. Thank you.
Okay. Since we are the applicant, is the property owner present? Is the property owner present? Seeing none, public input. We have any written requests? Is there anyone in the audience that'd like to speak for or against this item? We're going to close public input. I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution issuing an order to declare the existence of a public nuisance at 2352 Sunnyview Drive, Oviedo, required corrective action by July 14th, 2022, and authorize necessary corrective action by the county in event the nuisance is not abated by the recorded owner.
Can I ask you a
Chairman?
question between, the request was for a continuance.
What's-
Yes, the request was for a continuance. The
Thank you for telling me that.
staff, as Liz said, staff had discovered that a list pendants had been filed, which basically stays any available action that we can
Then I
take.
correct the motion, and I make a motion for continuance.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, any discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you for that correction. Before we adjourn the meeting, I'd like to ask County Manager, anything additional?
No, Mr. Chairman.
County Attorney,
Nothing at this time.
anything from the board? No, sir. Meeting is now adjourned, and we'll go to, take a 5-minute recess, and we'll reconvene the work session. Reconvene the board to this work session.
These are closest.
And I'd just like to, I know the staff's going to show a couple of videos, and then our consultants are going to present. The way this agenda is broken out, where it says the topic and then break for questions, at those breaks, that's when we'll ask our questions. Is that okay?
Yes.
I just want to make sure we have all the rules of engagement.
We have them, now we should follow them.
We're going to try.
Let's see if we can do it.
Mr. Applegate, I don't mean to go around you, but I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Rebecca, if that's okay. Ms. Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. For the record, Rebecca Hammack, Development Services Director. This is the 2045 Envision Seminole 2045 work session. This is for the Board of County Commissioners so that we can receive your input and feedback. We're going to summarize the community meetings that we've had thus far. We've had 6 meetings total. We had 3 listening tours that were the same meeting but held in 3 different geographic locations. And then we also then had 3 visioning tour meetings where we were seeking input from the public. So we did have gone through these presentations with the board members on an individual basis. So these are the same presentations that were presented to you, but we will be able to go into a little bit more detail today since we have more time. And then we're also hoping to then get your feedback on the county's vision as well as receive any additional impact or input from the public. We have prepared a video with the help of SGTV. They did a great job creating a video where we've interviewed citizens of the county on what their vision is for Seminole County, so we'd like to start with that. And then I will hand it over to, we have 2 consultant teams here today. We have GAI, and Patrick is going to be presenting for GAI. And then after that, Eliza will be presenting for Canaan. So with that, I'll start the video, and then we'll turn it over to Patrick.
I grew up in this community. It's great to be a part of what it used to be and what it is now.
I love this county. It does so many things for the people that live here.
See if we got any beans over there. You really have to take into account a bunch of different areas and ways that people are living within Seminole County. It's got to work for all of us.
I encourage development, but it has to be smart development. You know, you really have to look at what you're doing. It's not always good to cut out all the trees and price people out of their homes with taxes and, you know, just to build something new. It has to be smart.
I wanted to make sure that the rural boundary was able to be preserved. I want to make sure that there's no encroaching on the rural boundary. We have something good out here and we want to keep it that way.
People want to protect that word rural. That's why they chose to move here.
There's a lot of discussion about keeping the development within the cities. Cities can, of course, grow. The rural area, however, the rural boundary is set the boundary of that growth, so it won't be going into those areas. But there will still be development within the rural boundary. It just won't be changing the zoning.
You need that growth. You do. You know, you need that growth. You need to be able to create jobs. You need to make sure that people have safe, nice places to live. You need to make sure that people can get from point A to point B.
I would love to see more affordable housing, because if we do not have affordable housing, who's going to want to move here, first of all? They won't be able to afford it.
It's a balance, and to make sure that people aren't fighting traffic because we put too much in, or roads have to be built more because of the way things were planned.
I want her to have the rural Seminole County like I do, and like I've grown up having, and having the privilege to be able to live rural and not have the boundary encroached.
When you include the community and their opinions and their values and what they want, it only helps get rid of the fear of change. And in the black communities, that's what we battle with. You know, when there's new development, we don't want to feel pushed out. So in order to get past that pushed out feeling, you got to include the community.
We as citizens need to be involved. We have to be. We can't sit home and complain because government's doing this, but they're not doing it, but they don't know what you want.
That the citizens are driving the pace and direction of development is something rather new.
We're not being left out of this. You know, you can have a voice.
Patrick Panza, GAI Consultants, 618 East South Street, Suite 700, that's Orlando, Florida.
Excuse me, sir, we cannot hear you.
Maybe I'd try this one. How about this one?
That's better?
Okay.
Or bring it
I will
closer.
switch seats. All right, one more time. My name is Patrick Panza. I'm from GAI Consultants. We're at 618 East South Street, Orlando, Florida, 32801. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Obviously, thank you very much for your time today. We're excited to share the results of our future land use analysis and help to answer any questions that you may have. So taking a step back, what our task was, we were tasked with a county-wide analysis that looked at everything from environmental stewardship to transportation infrastructure, all through the lens of your future land use plan. So we took a high elevation approach to build a big picture of how the county has grown and what the future looks like in terms of land use. That work resulted in 9 technical memos for the county staff. So today we're going to focus on just 6 or 7 of the big ideas, the major insights that came from that work. If I hit next on that, where do I need to point that?
There's that technology thing again.
I don't know if it's going to reach.
I'm going to have to do it for him.
Yeah, it might be too far away. Okay, no problem. So the major takeaways, these are some of the major insights from our future land use analysis. Obviously, it's not really a surprise to anyone. Seminole County is growing, and it's expected to continue to grow in both population and jobs. The county growing in projections of both population is really population and jobs. The best way for us to really take a look at that is saying, well, what does this population mean for the county in terms of housing? How many houses are we going to need in order to accommodate this population growth? Based on a recent report by a third party given to the county, we're working with an estimate of 38,000 additional dwelling units by the year 2045. The great news about the way things have been going is that your conservation policies, they're working. That's another one of our big insights. The way that we know that that's true, 97% of the growth that you've had since 2020 or since 2000 has happened within your urban service area. As a result, your urban footprint is becoming denser. The numbers, so your urban footprint has grown by 8%. That's land that has been developed within the urban service area since 2000. But the number of people per developed acre has increased by 17%. So that disparate rate there is showing that it's happening at a denser way. This is leading to a few things, one of them being mobility challenges. That denser urban development, it does lead to mobility challenges. So when taking a look at the big picture of your infrastructure network, you have a good arterial network and connectivity is very strong there throughout the county. You have some uneven connectivity at the local level, and there are some challenges presented by a limited transit build-out at the moment. Residential land, the big picture there is that we know there's a lot of land left to accommodate residential growth within your urban service area and outside of your urban service area, of course. But specifically within what we're calling the preferred development area, we'll get to that a little bit later, we know there's a lot of land left. Of that land, one thing we will point out is that a lot of that is within the municipalities. It currently holds a future land use designation that would support mixed or mixed use, multi-use development, and that's a very important piece of information. So when we started off here, taking a big picture there at existing land use, it's pretty easy to see when looking at existing land use the way that things have grown over time. But a much simpler way to look at it is the next slide here, where we kind of boil this down a little bit, and you can see in gray, these are our suburban density sort of areas. The darker areas, which happen to coincide a lot with where the municipalities are, that's your more intense development. And in the yellows and the greens, they're showing rural and agricultural development patterns. So looking at this a little bit differently, we can see these pink spots here. That's showing where this growth has happened within the urban service area since 2000. That color that is showing a change in land cover to an urban land use. You can go to the next one. Here we're looking a little bit at density, okay, in just the incorporated areas. And again, harking back to that ratio of people per developed area that we're talking about, that's getting denser. And as expected, that's happening on the periphery, on the edges of your municipal boundaries. Next slide. So when we really start to take a look at future land use in general across the county, well, the first thing that we did was create this sort of crosswalk, right? We created a countywide future land use, adapting all of the municipal designations, of which there are many, adapting them to the county's future land use categories so we can take a look at this countywide and look at future land use along an even plane. That's the map that you're looking at here today on that slide there. The next step there for us was looking at the big numbers. What is the challenge at hand? What is the reality? And what is the projected expectations for the future growth in Seminole County? Lending into that is, and prompting this analysis, is some of the requirements on the county staff in terms of accommodating or planning for projected growth. We know that through Florida statutes, you need to have a future land use plan and a comprehensive plan that can demonstrate it can accommodate the next 10 years of population growth. And so when we're looking at these numbers, we have these large numbers for population along a timeline. We understand what that can mean in terms of dwelling units, and this is how we're at that 38,000 number. So what does this mean in terms of the people? When we look at a cross-section of your population here in the county, we know over time things have been changing a little bit. On the left side there in blue, you've got the age breakdown in 2010. On the right side in orange, you've got it in 2021. We see that right there in that 25 to 34 group, all the way up through 35 and 45 to 54, you've got a very large section of your population. Next slide, please. This is prime home buying time for your population. And when you look at the percentage of home purchases that have been happening, a lot of these are new construction. So this lends into the vacant land debate here, right? That's continued to rise. The share of home sales that have been new construction continues to rise. We see it kind of at a bottoming out there around 2015. It's since doubled, and we expect we expected that sort of flattening along the pandemic timeline, but the general trend is really what should be paid attention to. So what does this look like in terms of units? Okay, there's a lot of information shown on this graph, but there are a couple things we're pulling out of this. Okay, in green, those bottom parts of the bars, that's your single-family detached standard fare single-family home units. So we're looking at trends over time here, and there's a couple things that this tells us. First and foremost, the proportion between typologies is changing. And this goes into the conversation about things getting denser within the county. You see the proportion between single-family attached and detached changing. in favor of slightly more units in the attached format. You see this ebb and flow in the orange bands there of multifamily construction and absorption. And we see generally over time that that proportion of multifamily to single family is changing in favor of denser typologies. So geographically, we wanted to take a look at where this is happening. And again, with the topic of where that density is taking place, it's the same picture when you look at it in terms of typology. So here we've got the municipalities sort of grayed out, and you're looking at just this residential units by type in your unincorporated lands. We see the yellow, that's your traditional single-family unit detached. And we see there in pockets along the edges of your municipalities and along your corridors and areas, we see denser typologies coming in over time. So we're gonna switch gears here to talk about transportation and mobility. And before we do that, we can take a quick break here and see if there are any questions about population, about how population and land use has taken shape in recent history.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Commissioner Lockhart.
So just want to look back at, I don't know what page, it's page 1,317 in our agenda, which doesn't tell you a darn thing. But it's the graph that showed the residential units built per year by type of unit. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
So if the 15 marker, 16, 17, 18, the dramatic shift happened in 19 and 20. Do we know what we attribute that to?
Explicitly, I wouldn't say that we know exactly what that's attributed to.
But it was a dramatic drop in multifamily after 2018.
Right. The general trend that you can lean on throughout, let's say we can start there around 68, okay, when you're looking at the construction of multifamily units. There is this period of heavy activity in the multifamily new unit building. And then there's a cooling off period that immediately follows that, where all of those units that have been built, they need to become occupied. They get absorbed, right? So there's a very heavy correlation between that pattern and what we think we're seeing here at the tail end of the graph. Of course, there are a lot of other variables involved with that, but generally that would be the strongest indicator of what that means.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Zimbaro.
Thank you, and we talked about this in my briefing with staff. Just want to make sure it's clear, and I'm looking at a PDF file on my screen, which is, starting maybe at page, well, for that matter, I think most of it. If you look at my slide, which is number 8, Seminole County population and dwelling units from 2020 to 2045. You want to back up from where you're at there. One more. There we go. So, can you tell us unincorporated versus incorporated sections of Seminole County, what does that number look like?
That number, I believe, is incorporated into the study that, was it Balmoral or Balmoral provided?
No, I understand that, but to benefit those that are here from the public today, to understand, we need 37,509 dwelling units by 2045. That's countywide.
Correct.
Not just unincorporated.
That is correct. That is inclusive of the municipalities.
So, we have jurisdiction over unincorporated. We don't have a lot to do with what goes on in the city centers, although we've attempted to get joint planning agreements with many of them. We have with Sanford at least right now. So what does the number look like for the unincorporated area?
Yeah, for the record, Mary Moskowitz, Planning and Development Services. And as Patrick indicated, this information came from a study that Balmoral had produced for us, and that number was roughly, if you look at unincorporated Seminole County, it's about 16,000 dwelling units, but that includes lands that's currently unincorporated Seminole County, so some of those may be annexed.
Sure, understood. Yeah, we can only deal with a point in time, which
Yes. But so
I would
about
suspect
16,000.
would be today.
Yeah.
Okay, so not quite, quick math, 40% would come into the unincorporated?
Yeah, and that's kind of consistent with, if you look at the breakdown between the populations of the cities and the populations of Seminole County. It's about
Notwithstanding annexation,
Correct.
understood. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Herr?
If you go back to the bar graph, the other one, the one you talked about earlier. There you go. I think that stops at year 2020.
Correct.
It would be interesting, because I think there's been, I don't know that I can concur with that yellow line based on the feedback that I have. And I'm going to look at you two. When you were on the trail with me, the feedback about the number of apartments that have hit the community, I can't imagine that that was reverberating from the years of 18 and back. So the perception is still very, very adamant that the number of apartments that are being built to this day is significant compared to what there seems to be tolerance for. And I don't think this chart is indicative of what we're hearing, just for the record.
It's understandable. The perception of construction varies. It can vary a lot compared to the numbers in the property appraiser's office, for example. So what this is telling us is number of dwelling units. It's not necessarily indicating how many buildings that is on the ground and what the size of those buildings are and where they are in what neighborhoods. So that is a very understandable point to bring up.
I'd like to take it a different direction, but almost in the same. What you hear out there, at least from my perspective, is that there's more apartments popping up than what we see single-family homes. And I think what Commissioner Herr is asking, and I'm not trying to read into it, that if that's correct, then there should be a different, where it says multifamily, there should be a bigger intensity of multifamily on that graph than what's being shown.
Understood.
Or the
Or it's not.
perception isn't accurate, so.
Or not.
But I think to that end, it would really benefit us to pause and make sure that we have validation to these numbers. I also can't reconcile, so all of life for me rotates around the birth of a child. And so if I look at that 1995 year and cycle forward a few years, I realize I was fully absorbed in toddlerhood. But those multifamilies, I couldn't name one. And I don't recall the backlash in the community about multifamily going in then. I'm not disputing the numbers, but it would benefit us to have detail around these.
Mr. Constantine and Commissioner.
I think an additional piece of information, another layer of this that could be very helpful,
Yep.
that is achievable, is what we're looking at here is countywide. So another thing playing into that perception is if you split this and start taking a look at what has happened in unincorporated lands versus municipal lands, that could be telling of that proportion between single family and multifamily as well.
To lend you perspective, I was just a citizen back then, so I wouldn't have distinguished a city line versus a county line versus the next county over, to be quite honest with you. So I definitely think we need, maybe there's a phenomena of UCF building housing that's throwing that off, that comes in. We need that level of detail.
I can tell you about a number of years ago, the outcry of student housing is just as loud as the outcry of multifamily. And that's probably at that time frame.
That could be that bump.
Commissioner Constantine?
Thank you, and that's what I was going to say. There's a critical mass that occurs here. If you look at, it always takes a while for everybody to absorb this. There's two things that were happening during that time. Number one, the multifamily market was exploding between 15, 16, 17, 18, and then it pretty much died the last couple of years. And then the second thing is once if you look, it started going up dramatically from the, 10, 11, 12, and so they see this, and then, it takes them a little bit more time to just absorb the idea that there were so many apartments. There was less dwelling units earlier, so you didn't see it as much, and it was going through a lot of the cities. So, as you look at it and you look at the percentage of the multifamily to the single family, you'll see that the percentage was a lot greater than it was even in those, those years that you see the big spikes. Years of the big spikes, mostly that was in the cities, and mostly it was not, it had not reached a critical mass that there was such concentration of development.
Commissioner Zimbow?
I think,
and I respect the residential units built by year. Is there a way of putting another layer in there for TOD?
Absolutely.
Because, there's an opportunity here, which the TOD locations are in the cities. Are they taking advantage of that or not? Because that's an investment the county made. Are they taking advantage of it? That's the issue. Any other questions? Commissioner Zimbow?
I would only say you can go some of the cities, and I would say a couple of them definitely are.
Let's move on.
All righty. We're going to move up a few slides. Oh,
most of it.
There we go. And thank you for the perfect lead-in to this section, because speaking of TOD, we're going to start talking about your county's mobility network. We'll start with the roadways here. As we said earlier, very well-connected series of highways and arterials. Okay, and when you look at the neighborhood level, local level, you see some breakdown in that connectivity. This is due to things like cul-de-sacs, gated communities, et cetera. They're not necessarily things that you can magically fix with a transportation improvement, right? But it is something to keep in mind as we move on through our analysis. It helps lend some information into some phenomena that we see in terms of density and whatnot. The next slide there starts to show your transit network. In highlighted areas there, you see your Lynx bus routes. We, of course, have the railroad with your 4 Sun-Rail stops, which is an incredible opportunity there. We have some additional pieces there of the NeighborLink service area. You see how it's honed in on your major arterial network and how that kind of serves to move that transit in a particular way without necessarily having a lot of long reach into some of the more suburban areas. The next slide shows your very extensive trail network, okay? We all know Seminole County has a really, really great trail network. It provides ample recreational opportunities. Something to look at, though, something to be aware of, though, is that without really strong direct connections to the transit hubs, it does limit the utility of that mobility network there for things such as commuting, whether it's internal to Seminole County or regional. So when you, on the next slide there, you say this kind of all come together and paint the picture of your general mobility network in the county. Now, on the next slide, we're showing you kind of another way to look at the mobility network, and we look at it in terms of network density. So here on the map, you've got darker regions, and I think I've got a laser pointer here. I may use it in a couple occasions. There we go. We've got some darker regions in areas around Altamont Springs, Sanford, those types of areas, showing where you have more intersections per square mile. Okay, that's the general gist of network density. That leads generally to greater mobility, and you'll see pockets of lower connectivity seen in your single-family, suburban, and rural areas. And it becomes pretty easy to see a relationship there between network density and residential density. And we know this because of the way that transportation networks are built around, say, traditional single-family neighborhoods. Another way to look at it is to take a look at those two things sort of blended together. And it helps us kind of identify a few things because we start looking for incongruent areas. Because the important parts of this is not necessarily how many intersections you have per square mile in a given area. It's where do you have a lot of people, a lot of residences, and low network, low mobility. You might have some issues there. And conversely, where do you have low residential density, but a very good, strong mobility network? These are areas that could potentially be looked at to add some more units in the future, or that can absorb those units more easily without creating transportation mobility issues. The next one now. So mobility, when we talk about mobility, of course, we're talking about jobs a lot. So where are people in the county working? Where do people who live in Seminole County work? So looking at some data here, you see some hot spots kind of pop up. So there are quite a few people living in Seminole County and working in Seminole County. These are people using your mobility network, your transportation network, to stay within the county, get from home to work. It's always a good thing to see that people are able to be employed within the area that they live. The areas shown on the map here are fairly straightforward. You see your corridors, your I-4 transportation corridor, large employment centers. A couple things on this map, slightly misleading, not necessarily valid in terms of a hot spot. You'll have your county seat, your school board, where all of the jobs are attributed to a single address, but they're actually distributed around the county. So the next piece of that is, well, where are all of the people who live in Seminole County? Where do they work? So if you kind of zoom that out a little bit more, you can see that there are other employment centers drawing Seminole County residents. The hospitals in the Orlando area, Florida Hospital, Advent Health, Orlando Health, Maitland Center, of course, just right there on the southern end of the county, and UCF and Disney. So when you look at it in the other direction, it's, where do people who work in Seminole County live? And so you see, again, a whole lot of people in Seminole County. And when you zoom that out a little bit, you see that the draw of people coming into Seminole County for work is slightly larger than the amount of people living in the county kind of going out. So net, when it comes down to the numbers, net gain, you probably have a lot more people kind of coming in here for work than are necessarily just leaving. It puts some stress on the transportation network. But it's also a really good indicator that you have some strong employment centers. On the next slide. So the location of regional jobs really influences this map here to a certain extent. So you have a lot of regional jobs to the south and to the west, and what we're looking at here is just generally like what is the accessibility to jobs by auto from any given area in the county. So you see this hot spot in the southwest area. It makes sense because it's not just the jobs there on Seminole County's grounds that we're talking about, it's the entire region. When you switch gears and kind of look at that same metric in terms of mobility through your transit network, you see a much more limited picture here. Obviously, it's just really grouped around the Sunrail areas and your major arterials that we know you have an established transit network along. So this points out really areas for expanding that network pretty clearly. The next piece, we did sort of a very similar look at that streets picture and people, and essentially just kind of looking at jobs. So we'll kind of pass through the next couple of slides. It's showing the same picture in terms of where the jobs are, where the network density is, and ending up on the same sort of analysis where you can start to pick up on those incongruent areas. And so in the bright pink areas we see here over here, right, we see essentially a very high job density and a low network density, maybe targets for some mobility improvements and transportation investment in the future. Converse of that, you see these areas in this light blue areas where you see potentially some areas there where the low job density and the high network density is indicative of the sort of homogeneous single-family land use. So the next slide there is this coming back to our future land use map and having this sort of understanding of what the recent history of development has meant for the county in terms of land use, in terms of your transportation network. We started zoning in on activity that's happening there in your urban service area. And so earlier on, I mentioned the preferred development area in the county, okay? On the map here, it's shown in a boundary that essentially takes the center third of the county. And what it actually means on paper is that this is area that's within your urban service area. So it is exclusive of the rural charter area. It is exclusive of the Wekiva protection area, and it is exclusive of the econ protection area. So we initially wanted to look at opportunities that exist for development within this preferred development area. And because we already knew that there's still a lot of vacant land left in that area in a variety of future land use categories. So here's the picture of what that land looks like within this preferred development area. We have a bar on this chart for each land use category, each Seminole County land use category, for what is developed, and that's the solid colored bars there in the municipal area and unincorporated areas. And then on top of each of those bars, you see this sort of hatched area. That's showing the vacant amount of land left in that future land use designation, either in the county or in incorporated areas. So no surprise there, we see from some very large amounts of low-density residential areas in the yellow there in the middle. We see, again, also a lot of vacant land there. Earlier, we mentioned the large amount of vacant mixed-use areas in your cities. We see that there in the MXD category. And we also see all of your other land uses in terms of the ones that we would not talk about in terms of residential density. The future land use doesn't necessarily support residential development on them. That's your public and managed lands, public lands, recreation, et cetera. So now we kind of get down to the meat of what all this means in terms of residential growth. And this table here is showing these hypothetical scenarios of residential development within the preferred development area. And this starts to answer some of the questions about, well, how does residential population projections, how do these start to get accommodated over the years and throughout that timeline of the projections? So we've pushed this out to 2045 here to say, okay, in these future land use categories that can accommodate residential growth, that's from everything from suburban estates moving up in intensity all the way up to your HIP districts, your higher intensity planned development districts. By the future land use plan, what do these numbers really shake out to? So we've put together these ranges of anywhere from 80 to 100% of what the future land use plan would allow for. And we land on, at the end of the day, we land on 34.5 to roughly 43,500 residential units at using the vacant land that is available within the preferred development area. This is net vacant acreages, so it's already removed all of the environmentally sensitive lands by definition of the comp plan, which is generally your wetlands and floodplains, and it's just talking about buildable acres there. So if we go back to the numbers that we talked about earlier, we've got this split here between unincorporated municipal lands. We're at 14-something and mid-14s and high 18,000 in just the unincorporated area. So when we're looking at that 16 number for just what the county may need to accommodate, we know we're in the ballpark here already. So at a high level, this sort of answers that question. When you're talking about vacant residential lands, your future land use plan can support the projected population. There are a few things that do need to happen in order for that to come to fruition in terms of what densities you're building at. And I know that Eliza and Kanan will get much more in detail about that topic. The next slide, we added in just the full picture, okay? So as to not ignore the reality of what could potentially happen based on your future land use plan. Because we know that this sort of rural development pattern is allowed by your future land use plan in other areas, whether it's within the econ protection area and Wekiva protection area at certain densities, and within your rural charter area. And this is where you have, beyond even your suburban estates, you have your rural 3, rural 5, and rural 10 designations. And the general picture of that is that based on the net available vacant acreage in those areas, you're looking at another 2,500 to 3,000 units altogether. When you boil that down to just the county area, what you're actually removing is a little area of Oviedo there in the econ protection area. It's not a significant number. So you're still somewhere around 2,300 to 2,700 there. Okay, and that brings up these totals. So your countywide total ends up around 17 to 21. Your unincorporated area total, and then your countywide total ends up somewhere around 37 to 46. So those are the big picture numbers when you're looking at vacant land. The additional pieces of that are not included in this particular analysis are, of course, redevelopment activities that will be happening over the years, and then whether it's a change in land use in that redevelopment or just a change in density or intensity in either direction. So taking a look at what these lands look like on the map, just really quickly, we'll kind of go through these. These are just these vacant properties, okay? These are all the vacant properties in unincorporated areas of your preferred development area. The next one there is showing your primary residential categories and where those are, okay, in orange. You see them clustered around your centers. You see and centers and corridors generally, but they are distributed much more because these are primary residential lands, everything from rural up to planned developments. The next one there will show your primary non-residential vacant lands that are available. That's commercial, office, HIP, and industrial. A slightly different distribution there because of how your future land use map is put together. Of course, these are going to be much more concentrated along your centers and corridors as they should be. And this final table here showing that after that residential analysis, we all know that there needs to be jobs to support projected population. So what does it look like if that is the development scenario? We know that you're left with somewhere around another 28 million square feet of non-residential floor area that could be built in your vacant land still. And that's the big picture of future land use in Seminole County, okay? Those are our major insights that we took through all of that analysis piece. And of course, all of that leads up into the work that Canaan is doing and progressing with you and the public and just informing them of some of that how did we grow thing and what's the vision for land use in the future for Seminole County.
Before you leave, any questions from the board?
Yes.
Yes, that's Commissioner
Okay,
Constantine.
so I just want to make it clear here that, what we're talking about. Using Commissioner Zimbauer's favorite thing of 1314. Right. We're in the middle of 20 to 25. So we have to assume that half of those 8,000 units have been built approximately. So instead of being at 37.5, we're really at around, let's just say 34,000. Now going to this 1338 line, which was the other one that, this one right here that you're talking about. Just with the land available, and you made a very quick slide through there. When you said this doesn't count land that's being redeveloped. Okay, so just with vacant land, we are at the low end, county and unincorporated, because the other question was unincorporated, is it included? The answer was yes. Incorporated, excuse me. Even at the worst case scenario that you have in estimated dwelling units necessary, it's at where we need them to be right now for 2045 in just, because it's 34 to 43,000. So just vacant land. This doesn't include land that's being redeveloped, which I know right now, as you all recall, I lost my office of 30 years at Crane's Roost because there's about 4,000 units being put into that area as we speak. And that's not even included in any of this.
Correct.
Okay, I just want everybody to keep that in mind.
Commissioner Zimbauer.
I just want to make sure that, and I think I know the answer to this, is in your HIP TI, which we allow 50% residential units. Is this included in this calculation?
Yes, very glad you brought that up. It shows in the table there sort of a 49%, which I believe is like the stated maximum in the comp plan. So
Right.
yes, that is the assumption that we're working with there, is that of the available vacant HIP lands, 49% of it is being used for residential.
And so that assumes that somebody that wants to develop in the HIP TI would build 49% residential. They may come in and build 10%, 20%, 5%.
Yes.
Or something significantly less.
Right.
Just want to make sure that's clear. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Question I have, sir, is that in your mobility network transit plan, you show the Aloma Spur. The Aloma Spur is not anything that we're going to be using anytime soon. It is a substandard freight corridor, and it's only used once or twice a month.
Okay.
And so that needs to be properly depicted, because people would take away from this that that is part of a transit network, and I know John Dredge knows all about it, as well as a lot of other people. The Aloma Spur is something that would have to be significantly upgraded at a significant cost, and then it's not on our plate. So it needs to be somehow depicted like that. If you don't know what the Aloma Spur is, John can point it out. And then with that transit mobility network, I'd like for you to actually show us graphically where the first and last mile is, so that we can actually look at that from a population standpoint of what the opportunities could be.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome back.
Good to see you all. If you're ready, I'll just jump in.
Yes, we are.
So we're going to be, let me not skip ahead here. So we're going to be talking about the Envision Seminole 2045 effort. One of the basic things that we told people that we've talked to over the past several months is that this is something that the Board of County Commissioners has said is really important, so hopefully you all agree. That's what we've heard from you. And that we are working towards a particular deadline, which is the evaluation and appraisal report that is due to the state in December. So I'm going to talk to you about what the public engagement has been to date, the listening and visioning tour, both what we said and what we heard. We're going to talk a little bit about a geographic analysis of the county, as well as finally, to cap it off, talking about key issues that we've identified, and then ask you whether there's what we've missed. So as we go to the next phase of this project, we will make sure that we're hitting all the major issues. And given the time, I may skip through some portions that are fairly self-evident pretty quickly, so hopefully that's okay with everyone. So we are in the middle of the process. We've gone out for 2 tours, a listening tour and a visioning tour. We distributed this through a large number of channels and directly outreach to key stakeholders within the community. I talked a little bit about the meetings already, but we also did online engagement, including posting all of the presentations on YouTube, as well as posting basically the same surveys that we did in person online as well. You can see the participation levels. And so with all of these surveys, it's not a statistical representation of the community. It is the people that sought to engage with us, whose input we absolutely appreciate. And this is geographically how that was distributed. A little bit about those. 89% of participants lived in Seminole County, and a little over 60% owned property. Other folks participated because they do business or work in the county. The vast majority of people who participated are homeowners, which means that renters are somewhat underrepresented in what we're showing in terms of results. We had over 60% of households that responded had a person who's 65 or older in the house, and 30% had a child in the house under the age of 18. And when we look at the age of respondents versus the population at large, we see that it's actually a pretty good, every group is pretty well represented. There is it does skew a little bit older than the population at large, but at least every demographic age-wise is represented, apart from the very young. So what did we tell people on the listening tour? We wanted to make sure people understood how planning works in Florida and the county, as well as some of the geographic analysis and growth projections that we'll share with you later in the presentation. And we wanted to tell them some of the great things the county is already doing. Of course, you're familiar with these, as well as some of the, and there's more achievements, as well as some of the other current county planning efforts that are ongoing. And you'll hear us talk about things. You heard GII talk about transportation. And it's important that we talk about those things so that our job is to really take all these pieces and provide a central location to talk about them as a whole, but then there's additional, more detailed work happening on things like transportation or on water that is much more technical than what we're getting into as part of this process. So that was our first opportunity to break for questions, if we have any.
Any questions from the board?
I
Mr. Zimbauer.
I have a question. This is probably going to be for Jean Dredge.
Mr. Dredge, would you come down for a moment, please? If that's okay, Mr. Applegate.
Yes, of course.
Please introduce yourself.
For the record, John Dredge, Public Work Director, County Engineer.
And I hate to put you on the spot, but have you been following this process?
Yes.
Okay. And so what's your analysis as far as the Transportation Master Plan for 2045, how this does impact or does not with this recent
We do
work
also
product?
have a contract with Jacobs for the update of the Master Plan 2045. We just signed a work order a few weeks ago. That will be taking also data in consideration. We have two master plan. One, the 2045. Also, we have the East of Seminole County Mobility Transportation Plan. So all those information will be incorporated within those two master plans. Currently going on.
With this work product
Yes.
that's done?
Yeah.
But do you have any sense with this work product how it may or may not impact the work product that's already done on the master plan for transportation? Or do we need to wait till Jacobs?
Yeah, we'll wait. It should not be a lot of the information when you go through master plan transportation. We use in the past, we use the local data which we prepare by the county, also other data from Metro Plan and other agency all come together. But I don't see anything out of the ordinary kind of jump. But in addition, for the 2045 update, master plan update, transportation master plan, we're also looking at it a little bit differently than the first time. We're looking into mobility type master plan. So that will really to get us to today technology and today changes.
Great, thank you.
All right. Anything else?
Commissioner Lockhart.
I have a question. I'm sorry, John, it's not for you. You're okay. You're off the hook.
He's disappointed.
I know. Eliza, when we look at the respondents to the survey, 190 participants, it's not, we are very grateful for every 190 people, every one of them that took the time to respond, but it's not really a statistically valid glimpse of our citizenry. So what plans do we have to continue gathering data to make sure that we're getting a bigger portion, a bigger sample size of folks? Do we have, I guess I should ask, do we have plans?
So the short answer is we continue to get more responses. Some of the surveys are still open, so we're still getting responses. Some of the surveys are closed, so we won't get additional responses on those. But we have surveys at each part of the process. There is not a goal or a plan to get a statistically representative sample, but we do have approaches to try to continue to engage more people, including engaging with the media, social media, and of course, here I will say that anyone who's watching this meeting and wants to participate, there are surveys open on our website.
Okay. Since this data is being presented to us as guidance, perhaps, or this is what your citizenry thinks or would like, I think it's critically important that as we review it and absorb it, that we know that it's really representative of a good cross-section of people. So with that question, then the yellow dots on about the respondents on the map, there's yellow dots and blue dots. Was that just because we wanted to pick a couple different colors and change it up, or do they signify different things?
That is something, so we're using a public engagement platform, and that was auto-generated from the public engagement platform, but essentially that is the number of participants. So yellow is essentially a heat map. So yellow means that it represents more individuals, and blue means that represents fewer individuals.
Okay, fabulous. So could you let us know, doesn't have to be right now, but maybe as a follow-up, which surveys are still open and which are closed?
I'll actually mention that as part of this presentation.
Oh, you will? Oh, even better. Fabulous. Thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner Hurd and Commissioner Zimbauer.
Yeah, I think a good follow-up to that line of thinking is the natural question is, what would be statistically valid? So as we're pondering this, it would be helpful to understand how far off from that we are.
This is a little bit out of my expertise, but I think the way that you would typically get a statistically representative sample would be to call people rather than having people come to you. So this is a process where we are reaching out and trying to make sure people know about the process, but we're not cold calling people and asking them their opinion about things. And that is the way that, other than just engaging very, very large numbers of people, which we're trying to do, but we're getting the responses that of people that are interested.
So I think as a follow-up, I think statistical validity is based on numbers in addition to methodology. It might be worthwhile for us to figure out what that is, just as a reference point.
Sure. Well, you have to either have very large numbers and/or know that those numbers are representative of different demographics that are present within
which is the starting point.
Yep.
It would be statistically 500 cold calls of people that would be, just general population.
For what type of poll are you referencing?
Well, that would be a political or pretty much any,
Okay,
but any interest level poll of what people are thinking, which is, what a political poll is also. But as you've indicated, this is really one of those that are interested more than that. But it would, if you're going to get a statistically within a margin of error of 3, that would be about 500.
So I appreciate that and would like to have an expert tell me what the answer is, and then I would like to have somebody, because if that's reality, getting to 500 doesn't seem impossible for a 20-year plan. So now that that's out there, let's figure out what the number really would be, and then if the number is that low, maybe we need to think about that.
Commissioner Zimbauer.
Thank you. Following up along the same lines of inquiry, I know when we started this, we were all concerned about how this was being marketed to the public, what methods we were going to put it out on, Nextdoor, Facebook, Instagram, and so forth. Can you just real quick, and I'll have a follow-up, just review all the methods in which this was sent out to the general public to notify the general public that this was taking place?
Sure. That was in part one of the sections that I sped through. We advertised through, or the county advertised through most of the available social media outlets, so Facebook, Twitter, Nextdoor, for sure. And then I believe Instagram, but that actually would be a question for your public relations group for all of the detail on that. And then we also did direct outreach to over 100 individual stakeholders who represented different interests within the community. So we identified particular interests that we thought were important to the plan, everything from housing to different demographic groups to natural resources, and reached out specifically to people who had those interests, and then encouraged them to have their networks, to spread that throughout their networks. We also sent emails to every HOA that the county had in their database in terms of digital outreach, and those are the major points.
Okay, so, and you may not be the right person to answer this, but I'll give it a shot. 190 respondents, maybe that is being interpreted as maybe we're doing things pretty darn good on a population of 500,000 people?
I did make a suggestion to your PR department to tell everyone that a high-rise was being built next door, and they would probably answer the survey. She didn't take me up on it.
True.
That's brilliant.
Any other questions, Commissioner Lockhart?
Well, I would just say, I love everything that you've done. I don't think there is anything additional that you could do without additional direction and resources from this board. So I fully understand that. So it's not a criticism at all. I will tell you, one of my most difficult and demanding constituents, I took a walk with this morning. I live with him. I'm married to him. And
Your son.
no, my husband. No. And we started talking. He's like, "What are you doing today?" I'm doing this thing, Vision 2045, doing the presentation. He goes, "What?" I said, you've seen it on Nextdoor, you've seen it on your social media, you've seen it. And he's like, I don't see any of that. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, we sent out, and he looked at me. He's like, "Amy, I'm telling you, like, people like me," and I'm going to put him in a like me category, right? So very busy with work, family, taking care of a mother, they're not scrolling through social media necessarily looking for a survey to respond to, unless this is something that is an issue that is near and dear to their heart. And I'm concerned that we've got a lot of demanding constituents like my husband who don't even know that the survey is going on and would have an opinion if asked. Certainly, he has the opinion. He just didn't know that it was out there to be answered. So I want to try to reach as many additional people as we can, and if there are resources that you need to do that after we answer the question of what is statistically valid, this is such a critically important plan. I think more information and more data and more people is better. And then I told him to just keep walking.
And
We
he
hope
did.
that he'll stay in the
Any other
district.
comments? Thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, along those same lines, I know, and I don't think we've done it since Amy and I have been here, but in the past, the county's actually done a mail-out survey
We've done mail
to
out. We've done several
the
surveys.
residents, often sent with tax bills or power bills or whatever.
We've done phone surveys. We've done mail-out surveys.
Right. So.
We've done a lot of different surveys.
Just a thought.
The starting point's the statistically valid, and then you figure out the cost from there.
And if I may make
Yes, you
one
may.
comment, there is also, there are probably two things that we're looking for as part of this process. One is deep information from people who are deeply engaged in issues. So we do need that kind of information, and then we also need to know that we're coming up with solutions that the majority of your constituents support. So those are two different types of information that we need as part of this process, and maybe we're doing a better job of getting the first part than the second part.
But that actually gets me to ask the next question. There are some population groups, either older or maybe don't have access to the internet, that we're not getting to at all. So what is the actual spread from demographic standpoint of how many people, what demographics are we getting to?
So the demographics skew older than
Yeah,
the
they were
population
earlier
as a
in the
whole.
presentation.
Correct. Because I can tell you, I got a 92-year-old, he doesn't even know how to turn a computer on.
And we do not have strong numbers in the very oldest categories.
And he definitely has an opinion. Next.
Sir, so with that, let's look at the results of the surveys. So of those who responded, 96% of, so we asked 6 questions and we posed the questions. So we identified 6 things we thought might be important to constituents based on our previous work on the county and based on input from staff. And we asked them, do you think this is important, and how important do you think it is? So I'm going to go through those 6 things, and all of them were deemed important by over 50% of the people that we heard from. But some of them were deemed important by more people than others. So I'm going to start from the one that got the most positive responses to the one that got the least positive responses. So the most positive response, 80% most important, and combined 96% important, came for preserving more environmental lands. The next level down, we heard over 80% positive responses for creating places where walking to everyday activities is pleasant and safe, and integrating native plants and landscapes into urban areas. The next level down at 70% was increasing transportation options. And then the 2 lowest scoring, but still both over half of respondents thought these were important, was creating more jobs and increasing attainable housing. So, based on what we based on the conversations we had, that reflects the conversations that we had, and we also saw some differences which we can delve into more in the public engagement report, which you'll receive in paper format. This varied somewhat depending on which geographic area that we were talking to. So certainly there's some issues that affect some members of the community more than others, and that's one reason you might see differences in opinions, whereas there's some issues where there's very strong consensus. The next thing we did was ask open-ended questions about what people thought was important to the plan, where they thought the county was strong, and where they thought the county was weaker. And we got responses we gathered the responses into 7 categories. Overall, we heard people really like the county. They think it's a great place to live, and they want it to continue to be a great place to live in the future. And I'm going to go through each topic that we heard the most responses on. One of the large level of responses we heard was on preserving environmental land, maintaining the rural boundary, and the pace and impact of development. We also heard about green technology and bringing in preferred development types such as mixed use and infill, as well as affordable housing and ownership opportunities. And people came up with some creative ideas on how that might happen. Transportation, we heard concerns about traffic as well as concerns about safety for people walking and driving, and we heard interest in more transit. And we heard that people think that the county has great recreation opportunities, but there's always room for more. And the last 2 key issues, economics and jobs, we heard about the need for vocational training as well as supporting small businesses. And from a governance standpoint, we heard some very positive comments that the government is responsive and responsible. We also heard that some people wanted more room for input, and we heard some tension between people who wanted more government intervention and people who wanted less government intervention. So that was a result of the open-ended questions. That was all part of the listening tour, and those surveys are closed at this point. Although we do have opportunities for open-ended comment that are open on a continuing basis on the website, for which people could certainly give their opinion on strengths and weaknesses. The survey that is still open is the visual preference survey, and I'm going to give a little bit of introduction to that. We talked about some different geographies in the county. Within the urban service area, we talked about the central area and the Wekiva River Protection Area. You'll see these are similar to what GAI presented earlier, and the rural east. And we asked people where within these areas they thought different types of development should go. Participants were asked to look at a photo and respond with 6 choices, whether they thought it belonged in the East Rural area, whether they thought it belonged in the Wekiva River Protection Area, whether they thought it belonged in the Central area in one of 3 subcategories, in newer existing neighborhoods, on minor commercial streets, or in major corridors. And we talked about the corridors and centers overlay within the comprehensive plan, and that's what we were talking about here. We also wanted to show participants give participants some idea of the character of those areas before we asked them to vote in case they weren't familiar. So we showed them some character pictures of the East Rural area. I'm going through these quickly. As well as a couple of character images of the Wekiva River Protection Area. And we showed them where the centers and corridors overlay was located, as well as some examples of what that looks like today. And minor commercial streets we were not going by an existing comprehensive plan category, so we talked a little bit about what we meant by that, which was generally most of the larger roads that aren't in the centers and corridors overlay. So this survey is still open, so your constituents can go and fill it out right now on the Envision Seminole 2045 website. But we did want to go ahead and share some preliminary results. As of when the agenda went to print, we had we'd asked people where they lived, so we can also cross-reference this. We're not going to get to that level of detail in this presentation, but we can cross-reference where people lived versus how they voted. So we could get down to the detail, for instance, of respondents who lived in the East Rural area. How did they vote on what they thought belonged in the East Rural area? We have not done that yet, but that is something we're capable of doing using the software that we have. So the majority of people lived in neighborhoods in the Central area. We had good responses from the Wekiva River Protection Area and the East Rural area. And we also asked folks whether they were familiar with these areas. So we said, go ahead and vote on everything, but we will take into account your level of familiarity as we're looking at the data. So the images I'm going to show you are by category, basically the highest rated images as of the print date in the survey. And we will update this ultimately when the survey closes on June 22nd. So this was the top rated image within the East Rural area. And this was also over 90%, as was this. And then moving into neighborhoods, this was the top rated image with 94%. Oh, and I think I failed to mention earlier, we also gave people the opportunity to vote that an image was not appropriate in Seminole County, specifically unincorporated Seminole County. Over 90%. Looking at neighborhoods, so. And this was 83%, so those were images that were rated in the 80s and 90s. People thought those were appropriate in neighborhoods. And then these are the images people thought were most appropriate in minor commercial streets. Top rated image. And as we get into the more commercial, sure.
I got to ask, some of those photos, that's Orange County.
Yes, sir. So these were not images of existing Seminole County. The images are, in the future, what would you like to see that is,
Okay.
what would you like to see more of, not what is there now.
Okay.
And so we provided a mix of images from different locations. Still in minor commercial streets. And those were all over 70% positive ratings for those images. And then finally, major corridors and centers. This was the highest rated image. And second highest. And again, we're getting into images that are in the 70s here. And this image you saw in both was rated for minor commercial streets and major centers and corridors. And then finally, we wanted to show you images. There's lots of ways to slice and dice this data, but today we wanted to show you images that were the highest rated for being not appropriate. And I will say that we did an okay job of picking images because we didn't get any images where the majority of people said that they were not appropriate in Seminole County. But I will show you the ones where that caused the most people to respond not appropriate. So this was the highest rated not appropriate image, with 37% of people rating it not appropriate. This was rated not appropriate by 26%. But over 50% rated it as appropriate in one of the locations. You may have seen this image earlier, which is that a large number of people, over 70%, rated it as appropriate on major corridors. Everyone who didn't rate it as appropriate on major corridors rated it as not appropriate anywhere in the county. So that kind of makes sense. If you didn't think it belonged on the centers and corridors, you probably didn't think it belonged anywhere else. And just a couple more here. And the last thing I'll mention is that there's a mapping survey that is also still open on the website. We have not processed those results yet, but they will be in the public engagement report. And this was another opportunity when we could stop for questions if the board desires.
Excuse me, we have a couple of questions? Commissioner Lockhart?
So not so much a question as
Comments,
just,
I'm sorry.
yeah, well, I mean.
Or comments.
It was interesting to me that many of those images, there were at least a handful of people who just felt that they weren't appropriate in Seminole County. And so you don't know if that was just somebody who was being a contrarian who said, they don't want anything. But it is, I would love to be able to dig deeper into those kinds of answers and ask them why, because some of those images are examples of things that already exist here. And were they thinking that, it wasn't appropriate for them or wasn't appropriate for anybody? Just kind of curious about that. I do think this is great data. I think it's very good work. I'm just hoping that we can wrap our heads around a little bit more.
And if I can add, we actually did invite open-ended comments on what people liked or didn't like about the photos. That, again, is information we haven't had time to process yet. Okay. And actually, online they can respond to each individual photo.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great.
Are we at a stopping point right now?
Yes, sir.
Can we take a 5-minute recess, please?
Okay.
I want to make sure we have time for public input. So we're going to do public input around 4:15, 4:20. All right? You're on.
Okay. So in the interest of time, we're going to skip a couple of the slides, but we want to hit some of the highlights. Patrick already talked about this at a high level. The county is expecting to added 105,000 new residents over the last 20 years. The county is expected to add about 90,000 residents over the next 20 years. That means the county is growing a little bit slower than it grew over the last time period. That means about 40,000 homes in the people in the unincorporated area and about 16,000 new homes in the unincorporated area. So we've done some analysis in terms of where that might happen by looking at both the policies as well as the pressure points. That goes a little bit, it's kind of a little bit different approach than what Patrick talked about, because this does to some extent include redevelopment and the county's policies around that. However, it's not it's not yet quantitative, so we can't give you the numbers that he gave you around that. And we also looked at, sorry, my mouse is acting up a little bit here, at where developable land exists within the rural service area, based purely on the existing future land use, ranging everything from an individual lot that exists that just doesn't have a house on it to larger pieces of land that have future land use permitted on them now and are not in an environmental zone or otherwise protected. So skipping ahead to the key issues. The first is natural lands. You're all very familiar with the natural lands program and the lands that have been preserved under that program. The question is, given that natural lands was something that the public said was important, participants said was important, is there a need to to look at some mechanism for acquiring more natural lands. We identified the Florida Wildlife Corridor as a potential opportunity associated with that, which could come with state-level funds that wouldn't necessarily have to be provided by the county. The next issue was business as usual, and this is where Patrick kind of alluded that I was going to pick up with where he left off. The county, based on the analysis that GII did, can absorb the expected population under the existing future land use based on a few assumptions. Some of those assumptions are conservative in that Patrick's analysis did not include redevelopment, which is a huge opportunity. Some of them are more aggressive in that it assumed that every single future land use category reached a density of 80% of what's permitted, which is not always the case. For instance, many pieces of land may not be zoned for a zone that allows 80 and certainly not 100% of what's permitted under that future land use district. So that assumes a lot of rezonings, and it assumes that developers want to and are permitted to maximize the development on those lands. It also assumes that 100% of the undeveloped land within that preferred development area gets developed within that time period, that there aren't any undeveloped lands at the end of that. So what that means is, in terms of the future land use, which of those outcomes are desirable? Is it desirable that all of the land within the preferred development area is developed in that time period? All of the developable land is developed at the end of that time period? And if not, is there a desire to shift more of that to infill and redevelopment? And what are the barriers to maximizing redevelopment and densities within the areas that are preferred by the county by policy? Because the county has had this centers and corridors overlay on the books for, I believe, at least a decade now. And there hasn't been a lot of development that's maximizing the densities that are permitted in those areas. So what can the county do, or what should the vision say about how the policies can ensure that development happens where the county desires it to happen from a policy and a public input standpoint? Moving on to the next key issue, there were a number of different issues that were raised relative to water, the biggest being water quality and how to protect lakes and rivers, which relates to the impacts of development as a whole, as well as septic systems, as well as water availability and stormwater. But I want to do a little bit of a dive on septic systems in particular. This is an area that the county's actually been doing a lot of work. This is an image from one of your reports showing where all the existing septic tanks are within the southwest area of the county, some of which impact water bodies, including the Wekiva River watershed. And I will preface this with, I am not an engineer. This is where we are taking all of the information that your great staff has been working on and trying to turn it into a cohesive story about how these things relate to each other. So there's obviously a lot of reasons that these septic systems are out there. They allow development in lower density areas. They allow development without expansion of the sewer systems, but they do have negative impacts on water bodies. And particularly over time, they require replacement, or else they require both maintenance and eventually replacement, or else they tend to have even more impacts on water bodies. So the county's program already is identifying opportunities for improvement, including replacing those failing systems with new systems. There's also opportunities for more advanced septic systems. But why are we talking about this in a conversation that is primarily about land development and future growth? Well, because some of these issues relate to where and how growth can and should happen. So to the extent that additional septic systems are going to be installed within areas that don't have sewer access, is there the ability or the desire to require that those be the most advanced systems available to reduce nutrient loading to the natural water bodies? Or is that desirable within certain boundaries? The county has certain clustering ordinances within the rural area. Could that be a requirement to use those clustering ordinances that the more advanced septic systems are used? Can these utility improvements where sewer is going to be added in order to address water quality issues be coordinated with where the county wants redevelopment to happen? Because if redevelopment is likely to happen, that sewer systems can encourage that. In some places, that is not desired by the community, and in some places, that by policy is desirable. And lastly, in areas where sewer expansion is marginal, what's the trade-off between the fact that installing a sewer system might encourage redevelopment or slightly higher densities versus avoiding those new conventional septic systems being installed? Next key issue is rural enclaves. This is something that we've heard community members talk about, and so we've started to do the analysis on that. So what we've done here is we've started to identify where the rural categories are within the central area and what kinds of policies might be appropriate to apply to identify which of those would be appropriate for rural enclaves. Because the areas that you see on this map, the blue and the yellow, those are areas within the central area that either have suburban estates and ag zoning or LDR and ag zoning. Some of those are the best opportunities, particularly those with LDR, that's that vacant land Patrick was talking about that was going to absorb all these new residents. So if all of those are locked down under some sort of new rural policy, then it's going to be harder to meet those goals. However, we also know that there are residents within some of these areas that really enjoy their existing rural context and rural lifestyle, even within the urban service area. So is there a interest or willingness in preserving that in certain locations, and what would be the appropriate criteria? These are some examples of what that looks like. This is Brooks Lane, and then this is a more kind of a different context that has a dirt road, and Google Earth doesn't go back there very much, which is why the image is so blurry. We actually did go back there, but I didn't take a photo, which I'm still kicking myself about. Yes, sir? Yes, ma'am?
Is it Lazy Acres?
This is, I'm blanking on the name right now.
That's okay.
Oak Hollow. Yeah, this is Oak Hollow Lane.
Okay. I've got another dirt road for you to go down in my district.
Okay.
Oh, I got plenty of them if you want to go down dirt roads.
Nope, just in the.
You might not be able to get all the way down them,
but.
So the question is, is this an issue that should be further studied, and what are the policy objectives? We've started to identify some of those. So one of them is lifestyle, just people like that environment and they want to be able to live there, and they don't want to have to move out to the rural area to do that. Another key issue might be utility phasing. So is it better to have each of those lot split and go from 2-acre lots to 1-acre lots, or 4-acre lots to 2-acre lots, versus keeping those essentially as they are now and then having the edges change at much higher densities when you have sewer access and you're not doubling the number of septic tanks, for instance. And then there are some areas where it might be an actual wildlife issue, where it's a transition between the urban environment and the natural environment that might have a function beyond the homeowner's preferences. So it will be important as part of this to identify any legal risks and barriers and to outline the criteria. Of course, one is what is the existing future land use and zoning, which is what we've looked at. The other is the community desires. We've heard from some members of the community that they would like to see something like this in certain neighborhoods, but it would be important to look at all of them and see where the interest is. Lack of transportation access and public improvements. So are these areas where the county has already invested a lot in infrastructure? If the county has not invested in a lot in infrastructure, then that makes sense that might be a criteria for designating a rural enclave. And as I mentioned earlier, those natural resource benefits. Is there a benefit beyond the property owners themselves for the community as a whole in terms of creating wildlife corridors or that kind of thing? And what would be the specific implementation standards? Next, transportation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about conventional transportation solutions, those that the transportation community, it tends to be moving away from. Your Public Works Director mentioned mobility, talking about moving from a roads-only system to a broader understanding of what mobility means, and this is very much in line with that. So the old way of doing things is build in areas with open road capacity. That's kind of the traditional concurrency approach. We're seeing a change there and moving towards, because the people, even if you live in a far out area, then you just drive through all the congested areas to get to where you're going. So it doesn't necessarily provide the benefits. Old approach would be building neighborhoods to prevent cut-through traffic, and that's how many neighborhoods are already developed and will continue to be within Seminole County. But in terms of future neighborhoods, there's disbenefits there, especially as you go up in density. As GII's presentation showed, if you're going up in density, it really needs to be greater connectivity so that you can accommodate that traffic and spread it over a larger network. As we said, stopping residential growth completely isn't really an option because the state statute doesn't allow it, and there's other negative consequences to doing that, some of which involve transportation. If people can't live in the county, they still drive in to come to work and put pressure on the roadways here, potentially more pressure than if they lived within the county close to where they work. Widening roads is certainly something that still needs to happen in specific locations, but there are decreases in efficiency relative to connectivity, and of course, that solution alone doesn't recognize the need for different mobility options in terms of biking, walking, and public transportation, which can use the roadways more efficiently. So more modern approaches are increasing connectivity to maximize the public investment and support multimodal transportation, not just people driving. To try to have mixed uses both at the regional scale and at the local scale so that people can travel shorter distances to get where they're going, whether it's to work or to the many other locations that you go throughout the day. And Patrick really covered that, so I'll skip that. And then connected with all of that is walkable neighborhoods and the importance of having walkable neighborhoods to support any kind of public transit. People are more likely to take public transit if definitely their destination is walkable, and preferably if their origin, where they're coming from, is also walkable. Walking to a train station is much more desirable than something like a park and ride, in most cases, unless you're going a very long distance. Once you get in the car, most people will just stay in the car. So it's important to think about this holistically. How big a difference can multimodal really make in terms of moving people away from car trips? What can shorter car trips do through that jobs housing balance and increasing mixed use? And how do the decisions that neighboring jurisdictions make impact the county? So the bottom line is, what's the biggest return on investment for the county's future transportation investments, and how does the land use support the county's direction in terms of transportation? Attainable housing. So the county has an attainable housing strategic plan with the goal of providing a range of housing options for current and future residents at all price points. Why does it matter? We heard people talk about this as we were talking to stakeholders, that it's hard to get good employees if you don't have housing that they can use within a reasonable distance. People have babies grow up, they want to live in some sort of housing apart from their families at some point, so that's an important part of the community as well. And then supporting stable neighborhoods. So if the rent is constantly going up, that can make it very difficult for people who don't own a home to be part of a community. And it becomes a quality of life issue if people are housing burdened and they don't have money to spend on the other things that make a good life, including supporting local businesses within the county. So these are just some of the things that are in your current attainable housing strategic plan. So just to briefly go through, it's important to recognize that the attainable housing challenge comes in different flavors. Different types of people have different challenges depending on the region and depending on the specific concerns. So if you're dealing with a situation where only very low-income people have housing problems, then it can be a good solution to create targeted housing programs that deal with that demographic. if there's an overall disconnect between supply and demand, if more people need a place to live than there are places to live, then that can't be solved by subsidizing particular groups because you still don't have enough houses to go around. And that's why we're looking at these projections on how many people will want to move to the county moving forward. And then, as I mentioned, neighborhood stability is also important. So there's efforts that the county already has underway, including some of the ones that we've spoken about in the past in terms of the Land Development Code update. But we also want, as part of this process, to continue to explore what other options might be, might not have been looked at thoroughly yet. So those are all the key issues that we've identified. We'd love to hear feedback on those, as well as any other key issues that the board would identify. I will mention one that came up in our briefings that I thought was really helpful was open space within the central area that might be more recreational, and how that might happen.
Okay. Before we go to the board, I'd like to go to the public, if there's no objections. Shani, can you take your seat, please? Shani, can you go through the list, whoever submitted a request? They'll have 3 minutes.
Correct.
Please and I request that you give your name and address for the record, and then the timer will start. Proceed.
Katrina Shaddix is our first request.
Who do we have after Katrina Shattuck?
Bill Hyde.
Okay.
Do I need to state my address again?
Yes, you do.
Katrina Shaddix, 3287 County Road 426, Geneva, Florida, 32732. I was hoping you wouldn't call me first, because I really didn't write in long. I was still absorbing this awesome presentation. I can say from personal experience, I went to the listening tour in Geneva, and there was a very nice gentleman sitting next to me, and he was telling me how they really want to bring out services to the rural boundary and to Geneva. And I looked at him, I told him, we don't want services out here. We don't want your Publix. We don't want any more gas stations. All we want is high-speed internet. Everything else can stay far, far away. But he was very adamant about how can we bring stuff out here, and I said, listen, we have people that will defend their dirt roads and their rural quality of life with guns. We don't mess around out in Geneva. Come to find out, it was the guy who owned Canaan and Associates. So here was the guy questioning me, and kind of, you could tell his goal was to bring services out to the rural boundary, which meant bringing urban sprawl out to the rural boundary. We don't want that. And I think this presentation was pretty supportive of how we feel out in Geneva. Also in Geneva, what rated very low on that, on the survey they did was affordable housing. And my feeling on the matter is, yes, to fulfill the affordable housing needs for existing county residents, but not to bend over backwards to, accommodate people who aren't going to move here for 10 or 20 years. Why should we bend over backwards and gyp our existing residents to accommodate people that are selling their overpriced houses in New York and New Jersey and California to come here and we give them bargain basement prices? No, this is a great county to live in. They need to pay for what they get here in Seminole County, but we do need to accommodate our existing residents for that affordable housing that sometimes is not easy to attain. There was other stuff I wanted to say. Oh, there was a comment too when you said that your husband didn't even know about this. My son doesn't either, and he lives with a person who is crazy obsessed with this stuff. So I think that a way to make people informed about this is to put it on the ballot. So that's another reason to support getting the land buying initiative on the ballot, because that subjects 400,000 people to that idea instead of doing all the calling and stuff. But that's it. I have a lot more to say. This was awesome. Your staff has done a great job in asking residents of the county about this, and I hope it turns out to where we do preserve as much as our green space as humanly possible.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Mr. Hyde, who do we have next?
Chris Dorworth.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Bill Hyde. I live at 2379 Audley Street in Oviedo. If I yell, I apologize. I'm having
okay, Bill.
difficulties. Okay, I got a very different perspective on this, I guess. This whole thing sounds more like an advocacy thing than some kind of a survey. You've spent a huge amount of time and money. Of course, you know how I am with spending taxpayers' money and oxygen going through this exercise. And if I heard the numbers correctly, you only got 190-some responses to this thing. And I'd be willing to bet that the 190 people probably already have your ear. I'm betting it's pretty much an active group that's already there. In fact, I could probably bet that about 10% of them, I could look around this commission office pretty much on any Tuesday, and they would already be here. And of those 190, only 60% were homeowners and property owners. That's kind of disturbing, because frankly, that tells me that some 40% don't really have the skin in the game that pay the property taxes that support all this. So that bothered me even more. And then this morning, you all jumped on the bandwagon that 96% of the people, I guess, want this natural lands tax to be put on the ballot. But your sampling to get that 96% sounds pretty flawed. So all in all, I mean, it sounds like it was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed going out and seeing the presentation out there. But I don't think this is a valid. I don't think the numbers are valid in any way, shape, or form at this point. If you're going to do this and base future legislation and my taxes on surveys like this, I'd like to see better responses and some more statistics, even 500 people, for goodness sake, much less 190. So I'm calling it flawed. I know a lot of people can disagree with me, but that's what I got to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hyde.
Bill.
Mr. Dorworth, who's next? Who's next, Shani, after Mr. Dorworth?
Paul Owens.
Mr. Dorworth.
Thanks, Commissioners. My name is Chris Dorworth. I live at 1520 Whitstable Court, Lake Mary, Florida, 32746. I want to say thanks, because I really enjoyed reviewing the report that the outside group and your staff put together. I think it is timely. I think it's important, and I find myself rooting for you. I find myself hoping that you take the input and do notice a few things about that. One, first of all, thank you to Commissioners Lockhart and Herr for pointing out the very small sample size of that. And it's also worth noting that 53% of the total respondents, or I guess 54%, are from either the WRPA or the rural area. And that does not reflect what the actual percentage of the county is in terms of population. It's not their fault, it's just people, those are the folks that are more interested in tuning in. I'd also like to thank Commissioner Zimbauer for asking a question about HIP TI. Let me tell you something. I've been doing real estate development for 20 years now. It's inefficient. Sometimes land sellers who should sell don't. Sometimes people who own land who could put thousands of houses on it choose to put one house on it. Sometimes people who have land that is perfectly developable, they grew up there, they don't want to sell it, and they'll hold it into the future for all time. There's no way that you can force people to do this unless you attempt to do some en masse eminent domain of all land, which would then put together a system where you could, by central location, pot out houses. It doesn't work that way because we live in a free market. If you look at the thing they said earlier, they said there would be about 14,000 apartments out of HIP TI. Commissioner Zimbauer points out that assumes that 49% of all rental units there are. And in reality, there's nothing that forces any developer to do that, and oftentimes lots of reasons to put commercial development elsewhere. And you hear about these residential lots. Well, I want you all to know something. I have, for the last 20 years, on a weekly basis, looked for vacant land in Seminole County. I am joined in that task by most every national home builder in the country, who all have offices here, and all have people designated to finding vacant lots. If there are 22,000 of them, expect a line around the corner, people looking to build those, because at this point in time, we need it more than ever. And, you know, we pointed out Lazy Acres. I think you mentioned that off of Longwood Hills Road, and I think we talked about Oak Hollow Lane, which is in your district. Those are great examples of low-efficiency, low-density residential. Technically, they could be, but they're all on private roads. You can't access them from a main road, so all that acreage is not really there. This brings me to one point. There's 3 pieces of paper in front of you. That is to say that 15 years ago, if you look at the third page, or 16 years ago, this county commission, with Chairman Delar was on, entered into an agreement with Oviedo, where they would designate 4 transition areas. In those 4 transition areas, they opined that there would be no more than 2 units per acre. I would suggest to you that as you're looking through solutions, while there might be in some sort of Jenga-like Tetris-style approach to getting that many units here, really to offer the diversity of housing that you need. Suburban, single-family homes, going into those transition areas is a perfectly acceptable solution. And if you look at the first sheet, you'll see what the voters voted on. At no point in time did they tell you not to ever remove property. They just asked you not to add any more. And thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions.
Thank you.
Paul Owens?
Mr. Owen, who do we have after Mr. Owen?
Wafka?
Okay.
Wafa Esposito.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners. I'm Paul Owens, President of 1,000 Friends of Florida. We're a statewide nonprofit dedicated to promoting environmentally and fiscally sustainable development throughout Florida, including Seminole County. We're headquartered in Tallahassee. I live in Orlando. We applaud Seminole County's leaders for making growth management a priority and for undertaking this effort to fully engage citizens in the periodic process of updating the comprehensive plan. This is true community planning and a model for counties throughout Florida. Last fall, we partnered with the St. Johns Riverkeeper on a workshop for Seminole County, focusing on projected population growth of more than 200,000 people in the county over the next half century, and how best to handle it without degrading the county's environment and quality of life. In preparing and conducting that workshop, we developed a greater understanding and a greater appreciation for the steps that Seminole's leaders have instituted to prioritize environmentally and fiscally sustainable growth. So we think it's essential that steps like these endure decades into the future, no matter who might be behind the dais. The strategies that we support to promote and maintain sustainable development in Seminole County include a robust, lasting commitment to protecting environmentally sustainable or sensitive land from development. And as we've heard throughout the day, the county's own survey showed this priority was shared by a remarkable 96% of respondents. We think the supermajority requirement that the Commission wisely adopted last year to protect conservation land provides a model for protecting wetlands and discouraging high-density development in low-density areas outside the county's urban core. And one final point, we think a sustainable development pattern for Seminole County includes appropriate redevelopment. We urge that this be given sufficient emphasis in the county's land planning. Once again, we salute you all for undertaking this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Wafa's next. Who's after her?
Wafa, yeah.
Who's next?
I think it's Nancy Harmon.
Okay, no problem.
Hello. Wafa Esposito, 5040 Hogs Hammock Way. Nice to see you back again. I have been in the last 6 months laying low, and so I was the average citizen, average resident. I was above the average resident, always looking into the news of the county, what's going on, and getting interested. So I went on Nextdoor, and I noticed that Ashley Moore had put this out 4 or 5 times, and I missed it, being the average resident. So we missed a lot of people by saying that. I'm just wondering, by the time, I think it will be too late for this study to reflect maybe the county residents, but would be maybe definitely going on the ballot would be a good way. In the future, I was wondering, I was accustomed in the town I lived in, old style banner alerting people to such big surveys or studies. And nowadays I noticed, because I follow my old town, they have the QR also by the posts, by the lights, and people maybe can, take that and run the survey and participate. The way this is going reminds me of the Vision 2020. The Vision 2020 prospected something, and the reality of how construction or development went was not really reflecting of the wish of the people on the vision of 2020. Now we have in Vision 2045, I'm really hoping this would be more representing of the wish of the people on how they want to see the county smartly develop. What's really interesting is, so far I could see the study and what the people are saying, and then the projection shooting high up in one kind of development, which is high density, okay? And sadly, us as advocacy group, we've been saying in the last 2 years that the sample of the development that we fought are the ones who the people do not like in the area. So now maybe we will have at the end a good picture where to plant certain high density and keep cohesiveness, invest in the future, so the communities appreciate instead of depreciating. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nancy Harmon.
Do we have any more after that? Okay.
Nancy Harmon, 752 Pioneer Way, Geneva, Florida. I'm going to kind of hammer on the people and responses. The one thing I will tell you is that, and you all know this, we all know this, there are people who say, I'm disenfranchised. They don't say that word, but they say, it doesn't matter what I say. They're not going to bother. There are people who, today somebody was talking to me about this, and they said, well, they could have filled this out. I said, you know what? There are people that are working today. Tonight they will be home with their families. Tomorrow they will be back to work. Where and when are they going to get the time to go to the web page? They really are like, you know what? I live here, I have my house, I go to work, this is all that's important to me right now. If I can get to the park, I do. If I can't, I don't. And oh, by the way, I'll be moving in 10 years anyway because my job is going to change. So I think while there was less than 200 people who have participated so far, I can bet you there is so much commonality of those 200 people or less and the people who have not taken the time to participate in the ideas that they don't want more traffic, they don't want more growth, they will want this growth, but they don't want that growth, they want more parks. The problem is they don't have this as their priority. Their priority is where they're living, their job, and feeding their families. So if we want to make a big deal about participation, we can do that all day long. But the reality is the people who show up are the people who are bringing words in from other people. They're bringing in their own opinions and their own choices. They're not invalid. 200, they are not invalid. They are the people who took the time to show up, and they should not be, considered not valued or not the right, group. So I just wanted to leave that there, because I'm pretty sure you all know this, and I think the staff and the team have done the best they can, but you cannot force people to go to Nextdoor. You cannot force them to do Facebook. Our Facebook page, I posted this, we got 15 more people joined up because they wanted to read it. I didn't allow them to read it unless they join. So that's how in the future there are going to be members now, and they'll see the post. They can take it to somebody else and they can add. That's the only way I as a citizen can participate. So I think we can knock the process, everybody can, But until somebody comes up here with a solution, we're just kicking the can, knocking the process, and condemning those who have worked hard or not giving them the credit for doing the best they could. So I'll leave that, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we just go through public comments and then,
She said that was the last one.
I just want to make sure. Any more requests?
No, sir.
Is there anyone else in the public that'd like to speak to the board on this issue? Anyone else in the public? I'm going to close public input. Public input's closed. Commissioner Lockhart.
Thank you. I just want to be sure that our comments about statistical validity doesn't mean that the survey responses are not valid or that their opinions are not valid. I think each of us said how grateful we were for those 190 people to take the time to respond is hugely important. Those are the valid opinions of those people who took the time to respond. And I think what you're hearing, at least from some of us, maybe all of us, is that we'd like some more valid opinions from additional people. And it was in no way knocking the process. I think our staff has done an amazing job. They did, and our consultant, they did exactly what we asked them to do. So you're right, we can't control who responds and we can't make people go on Nextdoor, but when we find out that only 190 people do, then it becomes incumbent on us to go out and get some more input. So that's all I'm saying. I'm certainly not dissing anybody as a part of the process or respondents.
Any other comments from the board? Commissioner Herr.
So I do look at it in the complete opposite. First of all, by my count, it's 246 because there's 3 categories, 190, 21, and 35, and some of them may overlap, but let's assume they don't. But I actually look at going out and getting more input to be validating to exactly what the last speaker indicated, is that I don't necessarily think that the opinions will be different, but this will always be questioned with this level of input on a community outreach program. And we're talking about 25 years worth of planning, roughly, to be invalidated does not seem appropriate to me. So I would commend the consultant and staff and the rest of the teams that put this together, because they did do exactly what we said and what we funded. So if we need to get to a statistically valid approach, we need to figure out what that's going to cost, because you're right, nobody's going on Nextdoor. I go on Nextdoor to see if anybody's dog is lost that I can help with. That is the only reason I go on Nextdoor, because I find it to be disturbing. So we need to step up and lean in on this to make sure that we're moving forward. I agree, I don't think we're going to find something wildly different, but we need to validate the work that the 246 people put into this in addition to our teams.
Commissioner Zimbauer.
So with that said, I think all of us have, at least several of us have that concern. So I asked my fellow commissioners, what is the number? What is the number? What is the percentage?
We've asked for them to come back with an official number based on actually a statistician. It's not, with all due respect to Commissioner Constantine, the number that you would use in a political poll that's based on likely voters. It's based on the citizenry, and so I think we need somebody to actually give us that number.
So finishing that, are we going to limit it to only property owners? Are you going to open up to everyone? Who would we consider to be a valid participant? Somebody that
No,
is
that's not it.
I mean, we've heard statements about, 40-some% aren't even property owners in this county. And I can't tell you what that means, whether they were from another county or they're renters or family members. I don't know that answer. I'm just trying to get so we don't continue, because when I heard originally with this scope of work was, we all wanted to make sure that they got it out to as many people, and we suggested do this, do that, make sure our in-house people are doing it, make sure our consultants are reaching out. And I think they've done what we've told them to do. So I'm wondering, I think what I'm hearing is, we want them to come back, give us an idea of what a statistician is going to say is a legitimate sampling.
Anything else, Mr.
And a cost, I guess.
And a cost. Well, there's got to be a methodology, a number, a methodology, which would get to your who are you sampling, including the medium by which you're doing it, whether it was suggested, somebody suggested mail, phone, et cetera. Maybe it's a combination, but that we need to come back with that information. And you know, I always throw this in there, a timeline, because this isn't that difficult to do, and it needs to be a compressed timeline. We need to hire it out.
Commissioner Lockhart, then we go to Commissioner Constantine.
So there are no valid or invalid people.
Right.
All right? Everybody who responds is valid, but based on their demographics, you want to know how they answered. Are the renters in this community frustrated because they can't afford to find they can't find a home in the type of style and home that they want? Like there are a bunch of people who live here, including my college-age son who may one day want to move back home, and so I'd love to have him respond. What does he want to see? He's just a college kid, not an invalid person, but it's good to know that what the demographic is of the person responding. I would say that when we started this process, it was for the purpose of edifying this board for making legislative decisions and developing a plan. Since this process has begun, we now have people asking for ballot initiatives. So if we're making decisions about ballot initiatives based on a plan and a survey that isn't statistically valid, that includes voters, then that is a problem. So if this board is considering going out and putting something on the ballot, then we better know with some idea what the people who are likely to vote are likely to think. Otherwise, it's a waste of time and money to not have some idea that there would be some support. Not saying that the responses from the people on Facebook and Nextdoor are not valid or that they're not, their opinions don't count. But the reality is when you put something on the ballot, the only people who get a chance to have a say are people who are registered to vote. So if you want a chance of success, if that's what you're looking for, then you better ask those people what their intention is. And oh, by the way, none of these questions said, and I'm willing to pay more taxes for it. The question was, do you want more natural lands preserved? Well, yes. Okay, are you willing to have an additional tax on your property for that? I'd like to know the answer to that question as well. So because this has shifted from a land planning legislative methodology to do we go to the voters and ask them to tax themselves methodology, I think, yes, that it has changed from my perspective.
Thank you. Commissioner Constantine?
Thank you. And maybe if there is something on the ballot that might be true, we don't know whether there will be something on the ballot. We know that we've asked them we're going to put it on our agenda. But the fact of the matter is in my opinion, whether it's 190 or 2,000, I think there's been statistical studies over and over again in almost every community, and there is a constant, and that constant is everybody wants more recreational opportunities, more transportation opportunities, more conservation, more attainable housing. So I don't know from what we already have seen how much more we're going to learn, or how much more will validate or justify the decisions that are being made. I think that what we have asked, both the staff and the consultants, they've done a good job. The surveys are still open, and so I suspect that we will get more, hopefully more. Maybe that's something we need to really concentrate on, because I think that what Ms. Harmon said made a lot of sense. The people that are answering this are the people that are interested in the future of this county. And I think there's a lot of folks, and we're all out there in the in the community, and I think we hear the same thing all the time. You know, we want more transportation opportunities. We want more recreational opportunities. We want more conservation land. So I don't know, doing continuing this process in any other way is going to give us any more information than we already have, or will change anybody's minds. I guess that's an even better approach. I think we need to make some decisions as we're moving forward with Envision Seminole based upon those people that have chosen to participate.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the staff. I want to thank the consultants. Rebecca, your team did a phenomenal job. I think the consultants have all done a phenomenal job, as well as the citizens. I think the citizens that have been spending the time to answer the questionnaires and work with staff and go through all this material shows their level of commitment. I think we have a lot to be proud of. I think they have a lot to be proud of. I also believe that if we can get more information, I think that's the right thing to do. Staff is going to be looking at that, bringing it back to us. What are our options for that? And I think that'll be one of the next steps that we can do. I can tell you, I've heard from several people that they wanted to make sure that their voice would be heard. They missed the sessions for one reason or another. The person I spoke to said they missed it because of work. So I'm hoping that we try to figure out how to get to those individuals, but I think we're asking the right questions. And I think there's a lot of great input here that we need to take into account. And I think the ability to try to continue to engage the citizens and to get them to participate or ask them to participate is the right thing to do before we literally close the book. I think that's the right thing to say. I think that's the right move to make. So I, for one, would love to hear, not today, but have staff try to figure out what our next steps was of trying to get more information from the citizens, how to increase that number. And I'm looking forward to hearing from that. Any other comments from? Okay.
I support that.
Before we go to county manager and county attorney, I'd like to go back to Rebecca.
Good afternoon again. Rebecca Hammock, Development Services Director. Eliza's going to bring up, she has a slide that outlines the process and where we are in the process and next steps. And then Mary's going to give some information on where people can go online to fill out those surveys. But I agree, we'll continue to try to get more participation. I did a little bit of research while sitting there just on the statistical. So normally they say 10% of your population, not to exceed 1,000. So in our case, the unincorporated area is over 200,000. So to get 10%, you're looking at over 20,000 respondents. But they say usually the maximum would be 1,000. So for statistics-wise, to be a statistical representative sample, we'd need 1,000 responses.
Okay.
So
just research that.
I'll research it further, and then just to let everyone know, this isn't the conclusion of this process at all. We still have more steps. We're doing a community-wide visioning conference that's still coming up. Then we're going back out to the community again, and then we'll be back before the Board of County Commissioners to review the vision plan and to see how we can incorporate that vision plan for the county into our evaluation and appraisal report and identify areas of the comprehensive plan that we can update based on that vision.
Commissioner Constantine.
Explain to me what a community visioning conference is. I mean, what exactly are we talking about there? So, and Eliza can certainly elaborate, but we're trying to get the community together again for this. Previously, we went out to each geographic area and spoke to smaller groups. So we're hoping to get the community together in one meeting to talk about what staff and the consultants believe is the vision and how we can move that forward through the comprehensive plan.
Perfect.
The original intent of the Community Vision Conference was to really do a deep dive on specific issues, and that still is the intent with some of the most engaged stakeholders. We are working on the agenda for that currently, and part of that is we are going to try to offer an evening session and/or a lunchtime session that would be standalone that people could participate in without having to come to the whole half day to reach a larger segment.
Perfect. Mr. Applegate, on this topic, I'll get back to you after this topic.
Okay, well, I'll let Mary go first, and then the issue I want to bring up is about the survey, unless you want me to bring it up.
So we've mentioned a website many times, and I don't believe we've actually given the address of the website. You can go on the county's website, which is SeminoleCountyFL.gov, and there's a banner there. Just click the Envision Seminole 2045. Also, it's just Envision Seminole 2045, and that will take you to the website as well. Right now, we have the survey for the public engagement for the preference survey, but we can certainly look into opening up the other survey that was the one that had your questions about the priorities as well with the open-ended questions. So, but right now it's Envision Seminole 2045, and you can go to that to do the website.
Appreciate it. Commissioner Zimbauer?
On that topic, and I've wondered this, human nature being what it is, what does Envision 2045 tell somebody that doesn't know what Envision 2045 is?
I apologize.
We're all getting tired. What does Envision 2045 tell somebody that doesn't know what Envision 2045 is?
The website itself, so the website has, it's got the links to all of the public hearings, so there's videos, so all of the presentations that we did, we put those into a video, so you can click on the videos and watch all of the videos from the public meetings, and then it also has the surveys that we talked about. So it's essentially your ability to see those meetings that we have, the listening tour, the visioning tour, in a video format.
Understood, but if I'm just clicking through the county website or get to the front page, and I see something that says Envision 2045, what does that mean to me? What's going to prompt me to go, hey, I want to check that out. Let's click on it and go find out what that is.
I mean, that's the same as in any other engagement, so that's just the methodology to.
Oh, understood.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Herr?
So with the Community Visioning Conference, are we tagging into the Chamber of Commerce list? Are we tagging into Leadership Seminole? Are we tagging in through all of those existing list of very engaged community members? If we're not, we need to be. Maybe I should say that a different way. How about we tag into the Chamber of Commerce's list, we ask them to get it out, we put it on their websites, because they have, between all of them, that's thousands of people and businesses that bring more than one human. So there's just an opportunity.
Those are all great ideas. I'm sure staff will look into it. Anyone else?
Homeowners associations.
Mr. Applegate?
Just want to make sure, I want to follow up with what Commissioner Hurst said earlier. Would you like staff to come back in 2 weeks? Because I don't think we're talking about, rocket science. Do you want staff to come back with recommendations for how much a survey would cost? What type of survey would be required for this type of issue? And at least have some basis for discussion at the next meeting, so you can make a discussion on how much would it cost, how much do you want to spend, and what type of survey, what type of outreach should be needed. Because if we're talking about this important issue, I think we need to be clear on those kind of questions. So would you like staff to come back with that information?
That was a yes for me.
I'm fine with that.
I think there's consensus to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Now, keep in mind, because we always, every time we give them something, somebody says, well, we're already piling on. I don't think this is that big a deal, but I just want everybody to keep in mind that if we like something, then it's not that much to put on a burden, and if we don't like something, then it's a lot of things to make the staff do. This is not, this is pretty readily, this information is readily available, so I don't have much problem with y'all doing that, but I just thought I'd bring that up a little bit.
If we're successful in the outcome of this, it would actually unburden the staff from getting to the 1,000 people.
Mr. Applegate, was there another topic you wanted to bring up?
But we want to keep them doing what they're doing, too, not
Yes,
just
sir,
a
if
certain-
we're done with
We're done with this part of the work session.
So, and with everything going on, I've been advised that the purchase order for GT Molecular, that's doing the wastewater study with COVID, is going to expire on 6/20. I'm told that emergency management has funding to extend it another 6 months. So it's your call as to, one, if you want to make a decision today to at least extend it for now, and then on the 28th, we can put an agenda item on to discuss it in more detail, whether you want to extend it. If not, then we can't piggyback basically on.
I think we're done.
I'm a no.
I'm a no,
We're
don't
done.
extend.
Okay, good, because we have funding that we're going to have to turn back in. That's why I just wanted to let you know, we have emergency COVID money that we could use to fund it.
I think
If it's
we've
a
done
no,
enough.
Could
I
use
think
it for
we've done
something
enough.
else.
Let's
I
move on.
think we're.
that's fine.
I
Great.
think we made it clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Applegate?
That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Chipak, anything else?
Not at this time.
Okay, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.